This Prime Minister has admitted that deficits drive inflation. His minister admitted the same thing. That's why she said the deficit would not go above $40 billion. That was her guardrail.
So what is the response to these serious threats by the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister is telling us it's okay, he's just joking, Donald Trump's just making jokes, no big deal. It is a big deal. On top of that, what we're seeing from Trudeau is that anytime Trump says jump, he says how high. That is not strength. That is not actually responding to what's going on.
And despite the fact that inflation is rising, that all four measures of it are above the target, he's being forced to cut the rates to save the economy from outright collapse. When will the Prime Minister stop breaking the economy and call a carbon tax election so we can fix it?
Picture this, Canada's Parliament Hill, a place once known for its predictable rhythms, procedural politeness, and that uniquely Canadian brand of guarded optimism. Now, imagine watching that same institution plunge into a period of unprecedented tension where the stakes couldn't be higher. The Prime Minister, under immense pressure, is faced by an emboldened opposition leader who seems to have a new piece of damning evidence every week. Cabinet ministers whispering behind closed doors as the government's own fiscal promises are left in tatters. And as the cost of living crunch tightens around Canadians like a vice, we're witnessing a political drama that feels like it's teetering on a precipice. This is not ordinary politics. This is a full-blown showdown, and it's happening in real time right before our eyes. Welcome back to our channel, where we dissect the big stories shaping Canada's future. Today, we're taking a different angle, analyzing not just what's being said in question period, but the subterranean currents pushing our leaders toward a tipping point. In this episode, we'll break down the narrative that's unfolding, the accusations flying left and right.
New lavish apartment that he bought his friend, the new Consul General to New York. $9 million for
the cabinet's internal strife leaking to the press, the opposition's relentless highlighting of fiscal mismanagement, and the dissonance between what leaders promise and what Canadians feel on the ground. We'll explore the historical context that got us here, the key players vying for political survival, and what these fiery confrontations really mean for the average Canadian household. The past few months in Ottawa have been anything but dull. The governing Liberals, led by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, are caught in a narrative that paints them as big spenders with little to show for it. The opposition Conservatives, led by Pierre Poilievre, have seized upon every hiccup, every broken guardrail, every fiscal promise that's been quietly swept under the rug. Meanwhile, the NDP's Jagmeet Singh scolds both sides, but continues to support the Liberals in key votes, leaving many Canadians scratching their heads. And through it all, rising interest rates, tumbling foreign investments, and skyrocketing housing prices form the backdrop of a crisis that's no longer just political, it's deeply personal for millions of people across the country. But before we move on, I need to ask a small favor. We're trying to grow this channel and community. We know from our analytics that around 98% of you who watch our videos aren't subscribed yet. If you find this content informative, insightful, or at least worth pondering, please consider tapping that subscribe button. It makes a huge difference, and it helps us continue bringing you these in-depth political breakdowns. So, if you appreciate today's angle on Canada's political scene, less about partisan shots and more about understanding the bigger picture, let's keep this conversation growing. To truly understand why the stakes are so high, we need to step back and see how we got here. After nearly a decade in power, the Trudeau government is no stranger to controversy. SNC-Lavalin, WE Charity, and a host of other scandals have chipped away at their once rock-solid brand. But the current crisis is more existential. It's not just about short-term scandals. It's about the government's ability or inability to manage Canada's economic future. Rising inflation over the last couple of years has made everyday life more expensive. While global factors have played a role, Canadian households feel the pinch more acutely than ever before. Wages haven't kept pace, housing has doubled in price in many regions, and food bank usage has soared. The government has tried to paint their measures, such as new social programs, targeted rebates, and dental care for kids, as steps toward helping the average Canadian cope. But the opposition says these are mere band-aids on a gaping wound. The turning point came when the finance minister's self-imposed fiscal guardrails were shattered. Originally, the government insisted on not exceeding certain deficit thresholds, on bringing certain ratios under control. Instead, the deficit ballooned, and the opposition wasted no time reminding Canadians of those broken promises. The central characters in this political drama are playing their roles to the hilt. Prime Minister Trudeau paints the Conservatives as obstructionists who thrive on chaos and negativity. Every time the opposition criticizes a spending measure or rejects a tax break the government proposes, Trudeau responds with a narrative: they're trying to break Canada, they don't believe in Canadians, and they voted against helping families. It's a technique meant to reassure voters that his team is on the right track and to sow doubt about the Conservatives' motives. Pierre Poilievre, for his part, frames the Prime Minister as a weak leader who's lost control of everything: immigration, housing, deficits, and even his own cabinet. By citing the Globe and Mail's reporting on internal Liberal feuds, Poilievre shows that the Liberals themselves are not united in their approach to managing the nation's coffers. When a finance minister is rumored to be at odds with her own boss, it signals disorder and desperation. Poilievre capitalizes on this, suggesting that Trudeau either forces his finance minister's hand or sidelines her expertise altogether. The NDP's Jagmeet Singh stands in a unique position. He talks a tough game about defending Canadian jobs and standing up to bullies, be they foreign governments or Canada's own corporate elite. But he's also the one who's repeatedly propped up the Liberal minority government, preventing an election that might cost Canadians stability in the short term, but also denies them a chance to pass judgment on these very policies. The NDP's strategy seems to be get what concessions they can from the Liberals, like dental care, while criticizing them publicly. It's a high-wire act that risks alienating voters who don't understand why the NDP complains yet continues to bolster the very government it criticizes. So what are these leaders really trying to do? Politically, it's a game of perception. Trudeau wants to project an image of steady guidance through global turbulence. He reminds Canadians that inflation and economic challenges aren't solely his doing. He points to the global economy and tries to frame Canada's situation as comparatively better than other G7 countries. The trouble is, when your pitch is, others have it worse, it doesn't inspire confidence. Canadians don't want to be mediocre among struggling nations. They want a country that can lead, innovate, and improve their standard of living. Poilievre's narrative is simpler. Everything is broken because of Trudeau. He lists the problems: housing unaffordability, rising debt, inflation, strained healthcare, and lays them all at the Prime Minister's feet. It's effective rhetoric because it speaks directly to the frustrations people feel. But to govern, one must offer solutions, and the Conservatives have begun trickling out their own proposals, scrapping certain taxes, incentivizing housing construction, and getting bureaucrats out of the way. The effectiveness of these proposals, of course, would only be tested if and when they form government. The NDP tries to carve out a narrative of compassion and strength, pushing for social programs, stronger worker protections, and a more resilient Canada. But their leverage over the Liberals without triggering an election is finite. Eventually, if conditions worsen, they'll face a choice: continue propping up a struggling government, or join forces with the Conservatives to force an election and risk losing their own political standing in the process. While the drama in the House of Commons can feel like mere political theater, real policies and real lives hang in the balance. Let's examine some of the key issues. Housing. Prices have doubled in many cities, making home ownership a distant dream for younger Canadians. The Liberals tout their Housing Accelerator Fund, but critics say it's mired in bureaucracy and doesn't directly build homes. The Conservatives propose cutting the GST from new homes and scaling back red tape. The question is, which approach really gets homes built faster and cheaper? Deficit and debt? The Liberals once promised guardrails and maximum deficit targets that they wouldn't surpass. Those promises have gone by the wayside. The Conservatives argue that borrowing more money is irresponsible, saddling future generations with debt and increasing vulnerability to interest rate hikes. The Liberals counter that these investments support vulnerable Canadians and stimulate economic growth. Canadians must ask, is the government spending making their life better, or just kicking the can down the road? Inflation and interest rates? While inflation has moderated from its peak, core costs, like groceries, fuel, and rent, remain stubbornly high. The Prime Minister claims credit for the Bank of Canada's rate cuts, but critics argue that a falling interest rate in a stressed economy isn't a sign of health. It can signal weakness, slowing growth, and potentially looming recession. Poilievre claims the government's overspending caused inflation to soar in the first place, and now that inflation is easing, partly due to global factors and weakened consumer demand, Trudeau's attempts to claim credit ring hollow. Foreign investment and economic confidence? The Prime Minister mentions Canada as a top destination for foreign direct investment, but at what cost? Critics point out that Canada often subsidizes multinational corporations to set up shop, effectively paying them to invest here. When you're paying corporations billions to come, is that really an investment, or is it corporate welfare? This struggle isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's also about what kind of country Canada wants to be. Historically, Canada has prided itself on a stable, moderate political culture. Yet we're witnessing the normalization of acrimony, distrust, and polarization that many hoped we'd avoid. The opposition frames the government as elitist, out of touch, and incompetent. The government frames the opposition as reckless, heartless, and ideologically extreme. This polarization can erode the public's faith in institutions. When Canadians see their leaders hurling accusations back and forth instead of collaborating on lasting solutions, it can breed cynicism. Over time, this mistrust makes it harder to implement big, necessary changes, whether it's building sustainable infrastructure, overhauling healthcare, or reforming immigration systems. We must ask ourselves, how do we restore trust? How do we ensure that politicians who claim they're there for Canadians actually mean it, not just as a rhetorical flourish, but in tangible policy outcomes? Another angle here is how tightly controlled messages shape public perception. The Liberals are masters of brand management, but their lines are starting to wear thin. Repeating mantras about being there for Canadians doesn't resonate if Canadians don't feel it in their paychecks, rents, and grocery bills. The Conservatives, under Poilievre, excel at snappy sound bites and social media campaigns that tap into frustration and anger. However, that anger must be channeled into constructive policies if they hope to maintain support once in power. The NDP tries to offer an alternative, but without breaking the current status quo, they risk appearing complicit. Canadians watch pundits, read newspapers, and scroll through endless social media posts, often curated to show them what aligns with their pre-existing views. This echo chamber effect can harden positions and prevent the kind of nuanced understanding and compromise that good governance requires. Where do we go from here? The current environment suggests that pressure will keep mounting on all sides. The Liberals face the challenge of restoring fiscal credibility, showing that their spending leads to tangible improvements and regaining unity within their ranks. If they can't do that, they risk bleeding support and giving the Conservatives an opening. The Conservatives, on the other hand, must translate criticism into a coherent alternative vision. Voters might resonate with, "Everything is broken," but they'll eventually ask, "How would you fix it?" Without clear, detailed policies and long-term plans, they might only be a protest option rather than a solution. The NDP will have to decide how long it can prop up a government that fails to meet its loftiest promises. At some point, the NDP's credibility is on the line. Do they stand by their stated principles, or do they remain locked in a marriage of convenience with the Liberals? For Canadians, the best course is to stay informed, engage in conversations that go beyond partisan talking points, and remember that politicians of all stripes must be held accountable. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. The audience's skepticism, their thoughtful questions, and their voter turnout will ultimately shape the country's direction. As we've seen, the drama unfolding in Canada's House of Commons is more than just political theater. It's a reflection of deep economic, social, and cultural challenges. A government straining to fulfill its promises, an opposition calling out every misstep, and a third party trying to balance idealism with pragmatism. Meanwhile, everyday Canadians are left to navigate a landscape where homes cost too much, groceries eat up paychecks, and the future feels uncertain. But this uncertainty is also an opportunity. It's a moment to demand better policies, better dialogue, and better leadership. If we learn anything from the tension crackling across Parliament Hill, it should be that Canada's success depends on more than one party's agenda or one leader's ambition. It depends on a collective willingness to address problems honestly and find solutions that benefit everyone, not just a favored few. If you stayed with us this long, we appreciate your engagement. We try to provide a different angle, a lens that goes beyond the headlines and talking points. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. We're committed to keeping this conversation honest, robust, and informed. Your subscription helps us continue this work and ensures you won't miss upcoming breakdowns of Canada's evolving political landscape. Thank you for watching. Your voice, your opinions, and your questions matter here. Let's keep pushing for the Canada we know we can have.